Hello, good morning, and welcome again to the CIAT webinar series on ICT in the tax administration. Today, our topic is the role of the electronic invoice in the post-COVID-19 era, hot topic concerning tax administrations and the application of ICT to their work. Today, we are going to work as always. Five of our speakers will share the experience with you. We will have some interactive polls that will be distributed during the webinar. And as you can see, you have had the opportunity to answer the first one. And so we have to say hello, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon to our participants all over the world. After two of the presentations, we will have a pause of 10 or 5 minutes. We will see how it is running. And participants will be able to send questions, and we will try to answer them on the run. The microphone and camera will not be open during the forum. And so let's start presenting our participants, our experts today. I'm Santiago Díaz de Sarralde, CIAT Studies and Research Director. And the important people right now and in this seminar are the following. Vinicius Pimentel de Freitas, Brazilian national with a degree in electrical engineering with postgraduate degrees in tax law, business administration, and tax administration, and a huge experience in Brazil administration as tax inspector and with everything concerning the electronic fiscal documents. Now in his current role, he has conducted or oriented programs for implemented invoicing in over 20 countries. Ana Mascarenhas is a Portuguese national. She has academic degrees in accounting and business administration, in management control, and also a post degree in accounting and audit. She's currently the head of the National Department of Planning and Coordination of Tax Audits. And concerning our topic today, she has been and is responsible for managing the Portuguese e-factura invoice system. She will be giving to us today a panorama of how is it working or how has it been implemented in Portugal. Next, please. We have the honor today also to count with Raul Zambrano from Ecuador. He's a system engineer and currently he is the Director for Technical Assistance and Technology in CIAT. He has directed international multidisciplinary teams in modernization projects carried out by CIAT in 6 countries and have participated in the improvement of processes and in the development and evaluation of information systems as a consultant for multiple organizations and over 20 tax and custom administrations. Daniel Álvarez Estrada, Senior Public Sector Specialist at the Fiscal Policy and Sustainable Growth Unit of the World Bank, provide technical assistance and leading tax reform operations in countries nearly all over the world, from East Asia and Pacific, South Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean regions. Mr. Alvarez represents its organization in different groups at the OECD and VAT Global Forum. Next, please. And last but not least, of course, Mr. Alberto Barrex, Fiscal Principal Leader of the Inter-American Development Bank, in charge of technical assistance and fiscal reform programs in Latin America and the Caribbean, especially in relation to tax and macro-fiscal issues. Before joining the IDB, he was professor at the School of Government and Law at Harvard University, coordinator of the Fiscal Policy Committee of Mercosur, director of the Statistics and Fiscal Policy Departments of the Ministry of Economy and Finance of Uruguay, among a lot of other merits. Next, and I will give the floor to Vinicius Pimentel de Freitas to begin with the very beginning, defining invoice. Both this presentation and the one by Raul Zambrano will be bilingual, both in English and in French, and I hope this will help our friends in different countries around the world. Please, Mr. Vinicius, your turn.
Good morning. Thank you for attending our webinar here. I would think that you can give me the presentation from my control here.
Yes. Hello, everybody.
Can I share?
Vinicius, you can share. Yes, please stop sharing me, and you can share the presentation.
Okay, I'm just waiting for you.
Yes, you can continue, Vinicius.
Here. Me if
yes, we can see your presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Again, good morning, everybody. Here talking some concepts that we have presented on the ST for leapfrogging on text administration. I'll try to be as short as possible. First thing first, so what is an electronic invoice? And we see around the world two different approaches. One that's most common in Europe and in North America, that invoice is a commercial document. And the other one that's more common in Latin America and other countries like in Asia, where invoice is a physical document. Why is it important to make this difference? Because with these two approaches, we can know who is in charge of ruling. In ruling, I mean legally doing it, this document. And I like to use here the definition that our colleague Raul uses. What is an electronic invoice? First of all, it is an invoice. So what's the purpose of an invoice? It's to support commercial operations, basically, and then to register a transaction, instrumentalize financial operations, enforce commercial rights. For that, we have to have intrinsic characteristics, and we are talking about legal definition that an invoice must present. Doesn't matter if it is in paper or in electronic form. So given that reality that an invoice is either a source of information and a means of proof, we need to satisfy the needs of the companies, the needs of the government agencies, the needs of the clients, maybe people, citizens, companies, wherever. And when we analyze a typical business-to-business process or business-to-government process, we see that we are tapering here with only one single process of that is involved with a commercial transaction, that is invoicing. And we are not here thinking about all the other processes that a company must be worried about and talking about what is a commercial transaction. But here we're thinking about business to business or business to government processes. And when we talk about electronic invoicing, many people think about also on business to consumer operations. And then you have totally different environments, needs, and what the document you use to, and when you're talking about electronic invoicing, must be addressing both of these aspects, the aspects of commercial operation among two companies and the aspect of a commercial operation where the citizen is the buyer. And then when talking about some definitions here, we'll see that the European Commission defines electronic invoice any invoice that contains the information that's defined to be needed in any invoice, since it has been issued and received in an electronic format. This definition is a little bit weak. So when we came down to business to government operations, we see that the European Commission went a little bit further and changed this definition that the invoice must be issued, transmitted, and received in an instructed electronic format. Why is that? That it can allow for the automatic and electronic processing. So when we're looking at the European reality, we see two different definitions for electronic invoice. One is much more strict, that when the government is the client, and the other one that is much more broad and weak, let's say. And when we go to Latin America, we see that the concepts are much more strict. As you see here, I won't go in deep on that, but Mexico has a totally technical definition. And the other example, Brazil, it's not so technical, it's much more on the law side of the aspects. But we see also that is totally restrict. You see, you have a lot of prerequisites for a document, like a file to be considered an electronic document, and for this electronic document to be considered an invoice. So this is these two different approaches when we are defining electronic invoicing. Then we see in many countries that we have also electronic information about an invoice. I used to ask, is it the same thing about electronic invoicing? Let's see. When we have electronic information, the tax administration receives some information about the operation, of course, fiscal information, and the tax authority also trusts that this information is the same that exists in the invoice. And when we talk about electronic invoicing, the tax authority receives exactly the same document as the buyer does. So if you print this in a chart, when we compare e-reporting, how is the process? The issuer gets or fetches the data of the commercial operation, put that in a file, normally an XML file, and then transmits all this information as an invoice to its or her client. After that, the issuer extracts the data that has some fiscal importance, assembles a second file, normally XML file also, but in a different format, and then transmits this information to the tax authority. When we're talking about electronic invoicing, we have two models. It's continuous control model and the post-audit model. I won't go further on this issue. I'll just put here the continuous control model that's the most common that we observe around the world. And how does this work? The beginning is the same thing. The issuer gathers the information of the electronic the commercial operation, puts that in an XML file, but this here is the biggest difference. A digital signature is added to this file in order to convert this file in a document, in an electronic document, in the definitions of the commercial law, and then transmits this file to the tax authority. The tax authority then validates that this electronic document is abiding to all the technical requisites that are demanded to this electronic document to be considered an invoice, and then validates, and only the validate document that's transmitted to the client. I will borrow here a slide from a presentation that was given in the Exchange Summit Berlin 2 years ago, comparing the benefits of these continuous controls. First of all, the legal uncertainty for the client knows that this document that he or she is receiving is, in fact, in accord, abiding all the requisites to be considered an invoice. And we have a lot of other different issuer, the client, the tax authority, and the tax administration, and the society as a whole. This is what I was thinking about, to present some reflections about what is an electronic invoicing and a comparison among different systems that are put throughout the world on this issue. And I'll give the floor back to Mr. Santiago. Please, Santiago, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Vinicius. Great presentation.
Sharing.
Of course, of course. Thank you very much, Vinicius. It has been great. A lot of precise information and useful information on e-invoicing. I want to remember the 100 participants in this webinar that they could download presentations and even watch the webinar again in our web page, and that you can reach all these presentations and the past ones in our web page. The next presentation is going to be made by Ana Mascareñas, as I have said previously, head of the National Department for Planning and Coordination of Tax Audits and responsible for the Portuguese e-factura e-invoice system. Thank you very much, Ana, for being here with us, and I give the floor to you. Thank you.
It depends where you are. I'm in Portugal. I hope you are now seeing my screen. It's a pleasure to share the Portuguese approach for the e-factura system. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the context. This system is a little bit different of an invoicing system. You will see it's more a reporting system. So the context was that we already have, in a mandatory basis, the standard audit file since 2008. So in Portugal, it was mandatory to export a standard audit file for most of the companies since 2008. So we had data standards. We had also a project called the Invoice Software Certification, based a little bit on safety, and this project was more to avoid companies to delete some records of invoices. So we had here some data quality already, and we already have as mandatory to issue an invoice for any transaction. So we had here the data completeness, meaning by this, even if you are selling a coffee for a citizen, a final consumer, it's mandatory to issue an invoice. So we have a context of economic crisis back in 2012. We had the Invoice Software Certification, which we believe that was good for avoiding to delete some of the transactions, but we couldn't avoid the non-registering of transactions with this project. And we also realized that invoices were useless for final consumers. So in the cash retail business, what happened is that the final consumers, citizens, didn't ask for invoice. So it was a chance for non-registering transactions. So we had here a little bit of shadow economy. So the e-factura system, it's more or less, I'm going to touch on the key points of it. So regardless the way the invoices are issued, So it can be paper, it can be a cash register, it can be an electronic invoice, or can be issued via a POS system. It's mandatory to send it to the tax authority. So business-to-business invoices or business-to-consumer invoices. So you have to send everybody has to send all the invoices which are issued for any transaction. We decided that if the invoices were useless for the final consumer, so the final consumer should be encouraged to ask for invoices and to get some fiscal benefits back in their personal income tax. And as we have information from business to business, we also develop a support system to support voluntary compliance. So helping them to identify some mismatches and voluntarily correct them. So this e-factura system, it's for taxpayers subject to VAT. They have to submit some information, and I said some information because as this system was going to be focused also on final consumers, the National Data Protection Body didn't allow us to receive details regarding goods or services. So if, for instance, I go to a pharmacy and I buy some medicines, they say it's very private if I have a disease that the tax administration know which kind of disease I have. So a National Data Protection Body didn't allow us to receive the details from the invoices. So what happens now is real time or via web service monthly or until the 12th of the month after. I know maybe we had a mistake here in the slides. It was 15, but the correct is 12. You have to submit a file based on SAFTI. For those who already have the standard audit file, it's easy. So it's already more or less electronic. So it's digital way. Or to direct insert on the tax administration web portal. So if you issue or invoices in paper, you have to go to the web portal and do it manually, which is not very nice. This was meant to increase the voluntary compliance because we gave incentives for the final consumers who provided their tax ID number before the companies issue the invoices. And the compliance mechanism we have in place that I will explain also to report mismatches to taxpayers, especially business to business. If they don't react, an assessment with adjustments is issued automatically. And it's also helped us to better and faster risk analysis and to detect the carousel fraud, MTIC fraud more fast because we have data prior to the VAT return. I would like to make you a challenge. I always like to do, this is a way to approach. So we know that we couldn't make it with all details of the invoices, and that's also a reason that we could have it in the full scope of a electronic invoice. If you have a remote like this, probably all of you have at home, you probably have a lot of buttons, but you don't use all the buttons. Probably you use a few buttons of this remote. And probably you have a remote like this and you keep using 3, 4, 5 buttons maximum. So what is the lesson we learned from here is that this is the remote we need. With make it simple. Okay, we just need the 3, 4 buttons and that's enough. And that's what we try to do. So we have here the mandatory fields we can get from the invoices because of the restriction from the data privacy. So not many, I'm not going into the deep. And the new paradigm is that you make it simple and now you get a lot of data. And to get a lot of data, probably you don't get a lot of information. You have to get information, but you have to connect the dots and get some knowledge from the information you are getting. So you need insight, you need wisdom, and you need to have impact on what you are getting. So having information and some knowledge, we also needed to have some creativity. And what we based, and I'm going to talk more deeply in the system for the final consumers, is that on 2013, for every final consumer, every citizen who, before an invoice was issued, provide their tax ID number, we gave them back, the tax administration gave them back 50% of the VAT supported. And at the time it was 4 activity sectors, now it's 6, but mainly is cash retail business sectors, well, car and motorcycle repairment, hotels and restaurants, hairdressers and beauty salons, and more recently we have the vets and the public transportation. So in 2014, we incentive them to ask even more invoices. So we had a weekly draw of treasury bonds of 35,000 euros and 2 semi-annual draws of 3 times the treasury bonds of 50,000 euros. In 2015, we only accept deductible personal income expenses from the invoices we already have on our side in the tax administration, which they provided their tax ID number. For instance, if I go to the pharmacy, I can deduct my health expenses, but if I don't provide my tax ID number in the pharmacy, I won't get that. I cannot deduct that expense. So, and in 2006, we made the automatic personal income tax declaration. So everything is pre-filed, and the final consumer, the citizen, just have to click OK. So the final consumers, if they go to the web portal, they have a special area where they have all the invoices which the company, the business, declared to the tax administration. So me as a final consumer, this is a sample from a real final consumer. I can see with the tax ID number and the business name, if it's an invoice or not, who registered the invoice, because if the company didn't send the invoice for the tax administration, I can myself as a final consumer, if I have all the data, insert myself this information. So you have it registered by the business or registered by the consumer. And you have here an example with both. So this is for the final consumers. For business to business, we have we collect the data. We automatically cross-check the data from both all the companies, I would say. So we have the sales and the purchases from all in the end. And we identified some mismatches, and we make it available on the taxpayer web portal area. So those companies go there and they have to justify those mismatches. And this is more to give them a chance to correct or amend what we have. If they don't react, or if they don't amend, or if they don't justify, we made an automatic assessment. This is also good because, well, we give them a chance to voluntarily comply, and we take a lot of work over the tax audit department as well. So I want to share with you some results of this for the last years. As you know, we had economic crisis, so our VAT revenue is increasing and our VAT gap is decreasing, which is part of a result of all these measures. So some key success factors. So as we already realized, it increased compliance. Final consumers were the key to the cash retail business control. It allows to give back service to taxpayers from the data collected, so we can pre-file or simplify tax declarations. We can help them to comply before they have an assessment or a tax audit. It also speeds up the digital transformation process of the ecosystem. This is true because, for instance, the accountants are using the information to automatically register the purchases in their accounting systems. For instance, most of the companies, they don't want to insert directly in the web portal, so they prefer to have electronic systems so they can send, for instance, a file based on SAFTI. And also interoperability data with other tax administrations and government bodies. We are having some interoperability of this because several government financial support during the COVID-19 pandemics were based on e-factura. So because we have, it's more or less, it's not real time, but we know what's going on in the turnover of most of the companies because we have all the invoices. It supports the personal income tax deductions and fiscal benefits, as you have seen, and it helps also to business to increase their compliance. So this is all I have to share with you, and I don't know. I pass the word to David or Santiago. I'm not sure. Thank you.
To me, Santiago. Thank you very much, Anna. Wonderful presentation. Thank you. Also, congratulations for this wonderful experience and successful experience in Portugal. And I have to say that I felt completely identified when you were talking about remote control options. Even I was thinking that I was going to learn how to use some of these buttons. Well, so thank you very much, Anna. And we are going to go ahead with the next presentation by Raúl Zambrano. And after that presentation, we will have a little break. Please, Mr. Raúl, it's your turn.
Thank you, Santiago. Good morning, good afternoon, all. Thank you for joining us. It is a pleasure for all of us in SIA to have here Anna from the Tax Administration of Portugal and the two representatives of two important development banks, the World Bank, and of course for Latin America, the Inter-American Development Bank, which is a pleasure. So thank you, Daniel and Alberto, for being here with us. And I want to start inviting for all of you that have not yet downloaded our recent publication, ICT as a strategic tool to leapfrog the efficiency of tax administration, which is available for free at SIA's website as a PDF or as an electronic ebook from different bookstores. First, I want to go a little bit back to the presentations that Vinicius and Anna presented and take some of the key elements that they mentioned. But one of the elements I want to mention first is, as Vinicius told us, all electronic invoices, or the majority of them in Latin America, and all the information regarding the headings of the invoices in Portugal go to the tax administration in or near real time. That depends on the model. In some countries like Brazil or Mexico or Colombia, even before they go to the buyer, they go to the tax administration first. And that is one important, significant change in the way that we conduct business in our societies, because operations move to a real 24/7 schedule the full year. That is that is closer to the operation of a credit card company than to our notion of a traditional public administration in a 9-to-5 schedule, only weekdays and so on. It is a system that is continuously operation, even at the middle of the night, at early in the morning, at 3 or 4 a.m. when trucks leave factories, or Christmas night or New Year's Eve, because whenever an invoice is being prepared, that invoice will go to the tax administration. And that is very, very important, because it puts a lot of pressure within the tax administration to answer, to analyze and respond and give a response and process those documents in real time. In Latin America, we have over 100 billion electronic documents in the hand of the tax administration, and that's a lot, but it's easier said than handled. So I want to share a public query from the Ecuadorian Tax Administration screen, where you can see the number of invoices that on any particular day the tax administration is getting. And we are talking about 5,000 documents per minute, a total of 7 million documents, 6 million documents every single day. And that's a country of 70 million people. So you can imagine that in Mexico, for example, they are receiving 200 documents per second on average. That is a lot of information that is reaching the tax administration in a very short period of time. So it puts a lot of pressure on the tax administration. Things have to be constructed in a very sophisticated way to handle those amounts, those levels of information, and it is being done. Second, moving to the benefits. There are benefits for the tax administration, of course, and the first one comes from improved control capabilities. As Anna mentioned, the ability to reduce the VAT gap is impressive in that presentation. And the first thing we can do is cross-matching against VAT returns. We just add all the debits and credits reported in all invoices that issued by a seller or where a taxpayer is identified as a buyer and compare with the VAT returns. But that could also be improved to or used to improve taxpayer services, like to speed the process of tax refunds, for instance. And the next step here is the pre-filled tax returns. Of course, as Anna mentioned, the possibility of using information for pre-filling individual income tax to support deductions is there. Portugal, Mexico, other countries are doing that. But I want to mention that starting in 2017, Chile started to pre-fill VAT returns for all taxpayers. They are over 90% of VAT taxpayers are just accepting the return proposed by the tax administration. So if you want to talk about a good service from the tax administration, I don't think that there is a better example of that situation. And certainly other things that cannot be done otherwise. Here we can see an email from one tax administration advising the taxpayer of all the documents that have been issued, the debits reported and so on, before the taxpayer prepared the tax return. So it is a way to reduce discrepancies between the tax administration and taxpayers, and that is on taxes with a monthly period. Benefits for taxpayers, certainty was mentioned by Vinicius, and benefits for final consumers, as Anna mentioned, but also the reduction in operation costs, particularly because the network effect that we get from getting all taxpayers in the country using the same model, using the same standard, allows to, of course, reduce the amount of paper, the need of a storage of those documents, but the possibility of improving processes, internal processes like accounts payable, accounts receivable, inventory management, plus the reduction in compliance costs. Lesser the number of people that need to, in large companies, for instance, need to work just in terms of tax compliance. So that is also very interesting for taxpayers. And I will mention a little extra examples here. Factoring in Chile is the support from the tax administration has allowed to implement a factoring system, a national factoring system with a lot of information. I will go to those slides later, excuse me. With a lot of, not so many documents, but a lot of money involved in that process. I will share a couple of slides later with you. Public procurement in Brazil, for instance, in some of the states have been using the information in electronic invoices to determine correct prices offered to the government at the same level as they are offered to other private companies, with significant savings for governments. Electronic audit in Mexico that has allowed thousands of e-audits that otherwise would be impossible, and certainly for support this crisis. For instance, here we have the number of documents that the Ecuadorian tax administration was receiving on any week in 2017, and that's from September, and the number of documents that the tax administration was receiving during the quarantine in 2020, in the middle of the COVID crisis. So you can see that the number of documents has gone really down, not even half. So with that information, the Ecuadorian Tax Administration was able to identify which sectors, which taxpayers and geographically in what areas of the country taxpayers have been most impacted. Not the consequences were not the same for all taxpayers. There's certainly some economic activities that did not reduce their business, even some that increased the business during the crisis, but there are others with significant decreases in their businesses. So with that, the tax administration offered information for policymakers in other areas to support taxpayers in the area. So here we see another slide from the Rio Grande do Sul tax administration in Brazil, where you can see the impact in the sellings of some products and see that not all products were impacted the same. So things like hygiene, gel, alcohol, gel, gloves, masks, all of those kept selling, even increased in some of those areas. So that helped policymakers in their decisions. And this is from last week in another Brazilian state. They are identifying through electronic invoices the periods of time where a lot of people are within supermarkets. So you can try to avoid the concentration of people in supermarkets at any particular time. And that's live. So when that is happening, that could help the citizens of the country. And as I mentioned, the slides from Chile, the number of invoices that were offered and exchanged in the factoring system is not huge, only in the millions of documents, but in terms of money, it is significantly important, and that means access to fresh money for particularly small and medium-sized taxpayers that could they did not have that possibility using the traditional financial system. And I will end my presentation. I am a movie fan, so I will use some movies here to make my point. First of all is using the Laurel and Hardy, the hats are the same, but they do not fit both of them exactly equal. So the lesson here is that one size does not fit all, and that there are no perfect electronic invoicing system, and that it has to be adapted to the reality, the customs, the technology capabilities of every single society, every single nation. So one solution might be good for a country, another solution might be better for another country. Second, there is not really a question or to obligate or not to obligate. You have, if you want large implementations of electronic invoice, it has to be mandatory. If you keep it as an option, probably that number will not increase. The usual suspects, although this improves significantly the ability to control, to enforce compliance from the tax administrations, there will always be not so well behaved taxpayers that will try to avoid or reduce their tax responsibilities, and we have to take that into account and to use the information and the potential and the networking effect of electronic invoice to detect that behavior early and act on that. And in the words of Peter Parker, the Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And that means that a lot of information from companies and from individuals goes to the tax administration, and that information is very sensitive, and it is really, really important to keep controls and to use that information very responsible, to anonymize data for studies, to give access only to those that are dealing with cases, and to reduce any potential breaches, because there are secrets, you will know who is buying from whom and at what price if you misuse that information, or you can identify behaviors from individuals, what they are paying for, what they are doing, and that could be really risky. And finally, in using Casablanca, this could be just the beginning of a beautiful friendship. This continuous transaction controls that Vinicius was mentioned before. We think that electronic invoice is just the start. In the future, we expect that the tax administration will keep cooperating with taxpayers to improve the compliance enforcement capacity of the tax administration, but also to improve the competitiveness of the country. So with that, I will invite David to present a short poll for you to answer. And in the meantime, while you answer, I will invite you to stay online. We will have a break, but it is really interesting to have representatives from the two banks here. They will give us the comments, so stay tuned, go take a cup of coffee or whatever, but stay tuned and come back. And we will have, thank you, Santi, you can have the floor.
Thank you very much, Raul. Wonderful presentation, as always, brilliant and never-ending learning from you. We will have time to go deep into some of the aspects in the round of questions. And yeah, now it is time to take a 10 minutes break. I remember to you all that exactly after 10 minutes, we will be back with Daniel Alvarez and Alberto Barreix and the round of questions. Thank you very much for staying with us. Bye. Well, welcome back to the second half of our webinar on invoicing. The next presentation will be by Daniel Alvarez, by the World Bank, and Alberto Barrex from the Inter-American Development Bank. It will be a vision of the control of transactions and the critical success factors while implementing electronic invoicing. And so, Alberto, Daniel, I give you the floor for your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And thank you for the invitation and for the nice group that is in here. Let me go very fast on the presentation, and we can move to the first one if possible, or should I put it? Because I'm not seeing it. Okay. Basically, very fast. If you see, first of all, is how the electronic invoice is placed in the history of tax administration, and as we discussed a lot with Daniel, and we wrote in a book on electronic invoices in Latin America. First, the tax administration was organized by tax. Later, it went through functions. Further, it went to client, and now it's going by processes. And if you see, it's very, in some way, it has a parallelism with the private sector administration. If you remember in the 50s, and you take basically the US, because it's what we all know, the history of businesses there, you have one type of car produced by General Motors and maybe Ford. And this was the way that all the firms were kind of defined by a product. And here we have even separated income tax from sales tax or excises and customs. Then it went through functions. So we started to have collection, auditing, administration, personnel, the legal, and collection, and we have these things, and each of them have something in difference with the other one, and even there were like separated entities. Finally, we went to the market segmentation, and in market segmentation, we start with the small taxpayers, the very large taxpayers, and we start even dividing and decentralizing some of the options, and finally, we are in processes. And in processes is what the electronic invoice goes. So this is to have an idea of what is gonna come, but also how we have to change. And we have to change not only in our structure, but our personnel. The idea in the past was what type of tax administration we're gonna have. And in 20 years ago, we were thinking a person who knows about customs and tax administration. Now we think like it's more or less like a robot, but we will see in the future. Okay, let's go for the next one. The second one, I'm going to go very fast to pass to Daniel, is that crisis brought, particularly in Latin America, the reform of the tax administration. And this is why. Because when you get broke, when you go bankruptcy, when countries go bankruptcy, they don't have credit, not even internal credit, less to get to the international markets, or you may go to a multilateral organization, and they all will ask you to collect. And to collect, you need a good tax administration, and a good, of course, tax and custom reform. So now we are in the coronavirus crisis. Maybe a good moment in order to fulfill some changes, and the electronic invoice may be one of them. Let's move to the next one. I'm going to move very fast on this one. This is, and now this is getting old, and I think we have to update it with Raul and Daniel. Is that we have this how much the electronic invoice plus the electronic payroll can reach in terms of tax in terms of the taxes that we collect. And it's an incredible amount. We are relatively close to 80%. If we add up that with the electronic payroll, we can control a big chunk, also the personal income tax, and also of the structure of the corporate income tax. Let's go to the next one, and let's go very fast on the critical factors. One of the critical factors was already said by Raul, is mandatory. We have the experience of Mexico, Chile, and Argentina. They go on stages, and until you don't make it obligatory, these things doesn't take off. And even if you want to say, okay, how do we start? And then we move to the next one. You go to the largest taxpayers, and you may see you may need also as a portal for the small and medium enterprises in order to compensate that. But why you have to start with the largest contributor? Because the largest contributor are the middle point in a sandwich. If you remember the sandwich, it all goes down to a little passage, and then you move it up and goes the other way. That means that most of the purchases and most of the sales growth goes to the largest taxpayer. So if you control it, you control probably 2/3 of your economic activity. Third, create a market. We think that this is as important as make it obligatory. So there has to be a market. Maybe a market like Daniel is going to explain on the Mexican intermediaries, or maybe a market for the medium and small enterprises on some professionals or some teams of IT people that dedicated in order to sell solutions, in order to simplify the story. So, but the market also should be put in that way that is like in the income tax. If you don't cover the whole base, then you will have breaches. So in the income tax, you have to go faster and cover all the tax base. In electronic invoicing, the same story. You have to cover everybody, or if not, you will have. Second, outsourcing the technology, that's very relevant. You have to think that probably tax administration cannot do everything. And the other thing that we are seeing now is that the digital economy is moving fast. So you have to have your own mix on how much I will, on the IT sector, how can I really use third parties, which are much flexible and quick than us, than the tax administrator, how much we can use of that without losing the control and without losing the control of changing it in the future. What do I mean? Is that as there are new applications and new type of businesses, you have to be ready to move to the next sector. Let's go to the final one because I want to pass it to Daniel very fast. And if you can move to the next one, okay. The other is invest in yourself. What do I mean by that? You have a lot of data and you don't know what to do with it. We are in the era of big data with no data. No, you can go to many places and say, "Oh, we are doing big data," and then what do you have? Well, I don't have anything. And well, the tax administration is the other way around. We have a lot of data, and we can do whatever they say. You know, pre-fill, pre-notice. In here is very important, and we haven't done it to prepare what are we gonna use with this, which type of risk analysis algorithm, all these things, and even taxpayer service. But also, we have to think that this takes not only to invest on the IT and to provide and see how we can sell the product, but we have to do like maintenance. We're going to sell the electric car. Okay, now we have to be ready. What else we can sell? We're going to put a different way of doing what thing. So we have to think in another step, and we are not ready for that. And I'm waiting at least to start with some point like doing risk, especially for the electronic invoice. Providing new services that you have seen a lot done by, and I will see more, but you will also use it at domestical for the government purposes, new statistics, check the competition, if one firm has market power or not, national accounts, a lot of uses that Daniel will talk in more detail. And finally, is this issue that the control effort on the products that you can sell. For the first time, the tax administration have seen two things. One, we have done studies, and econometrically, the electronic invoice, and it's in the book, has been a great success. But you start with this. If you don't keep the effort with new things, if you don't keep the let's say the client, the taxpayer in some imbalance, it will lose the control effort. And finally, the electronic invoice, for the first time, can sell products. It's the first time that we're a provider. So, and this is what Daniel is gonna talk in the next two things. So for the first time, we are not only controlling, we are servicing.
Thank you, Alberto. I'm glad to take it from here. First of all, I would like to thank our colleagues, partners, and friends from the CIAT for inviting me to this seminar. Good morning, good evening, good night to everyone. I hope you are all well on health and as well as your families. Let me just finalize what Alberto was presenting with a couple of slides, and then a couple of reflections from own experience helping countries to improve, to implement the invoice and to improve tax administration and fiscal policies. In terms of the characteristics of electronic voicing, I think Raul put it very well before. And actually, I liked very much the way he did it, using pictures of films, because I think that sticks in our mind of what is exactly the situation. There is indeed no such a thing as a one size fits all. And in this graph, we can see that is very well reflected. We will, of course, not go into detail. I invite all of the participants who want to know a bit more about particular experience on this country, on the mix of countries presented here, to refer to this graph if they want to. But I think I just want to underline a couple of things. Well, first of all, one size doesn't fit all. And I think that also is applicable to many other areas of reform on tax policy and administration. And I think this is a message, and this is also coming from an experience from our organization, from countries, that there is no way that we can fit all countries and all situations and all different contexts into one single solution. Now, one of the things that comes very clear from this graph is a couple of things. First of all, we can see that one of the things that are common across countries is that there is a free supply for small taxpayers in terms of electronic invoicing, which make a lot of sense for different ways, right? First of all, small taxpayers are the ones who are probably with relatively lower administrative capacity to implement and to sort of get the technological needs in place. So that makes a lot of sense. And I think that is sort of like a public good in terms of tax compliance. We can see that countries across Latin America and Caribbean, the ones presented here, they go for that choice, which I think it's something that it's probably a good practice. The other thing is in terms of the obligatory for final consumer. Here, of course, we see different, we have different solutions, and we cannot say each one is better. What we can see from this graph is that if you make it obligatory, which is in the case of Brazil, Sao Paulo, and Mexico, I think it's more easy to get faster to access to the critical mass of taxpayers. Whether that is a policy objective or not is something that it's need to be decided for each countries. But the fact of the matter, or the evidence that we have seen so far, is that if you really want to scale up, you need to make it obligatory for taxpayers. Let me go to the next graph, if it's okay. Alberto, thank you very much. This is about the use of electronic voice, and this is where I want to spend my participation reflecting on a couple of points. We can basically broadly divide the use of electronic voice in three parts. One is from the business side, other one is from the tax administration, which is our main topic today. And also we can discuss about the other uses that we can think of. Very quickly on the business side, and I think also Raul made a very good remarks on this. Electronic invoice not only allows for a lower compliant cost for taxpayers, but also it's a tool, an efficient tool to make a more efficient management, cash flow management, treasury management, accounting, and all the sort of like the back office management and accounting activities that businesses conduct on a daily basis, which is a very important thing that I need to be underlined here. And of course, again, going back to small and medium enterprises, this is a very important part. When it comes to tax administrations, here is where I just want to reflect a bit on this. We have seen that the numbers produced by the issuing of e-invoices, Raul also referred to many of those, are impressive. Never in the history of tax administrations, and Alberto came from, refer a very good history of the latest reforms, have tax administrations so many information to be used for compliance. And this is a very important point. There's a lot of responsibility, as it has been said before, on tax administrations. So the question is whether all this amount of information or this critical mass of information is used to improve compliance, which is at the end the end result of tax administrations. I think our colleagues from Portugal have made a point. I think there are very good examples. Anna referred to that in case of Portugal. There are also very good examples which are referred in the book, which was issued by CIAT on the Invoice. But in my own experience working in this field, supporting other countries, that's not necessarily clear that implementation of Invoice will necessarily induce to higher compliance levels. There needs to be a lot to be done. And let me just get back to one single data that I think will portray a lot. Invoice is especially important for VAT, as we know. VAT is the largest revenue source for many countries, and probably the VAT is one of the requirement that a special invoice be issued is a feature which is probably unique for VAT administration. So e-invoice is very important, of course, for all taxes, but for VAT is critical, right? So the question is whether e-invoice is facilitating higher compliance, higher filing rates, payment rates on VAT, are improving refund control. And again, there's still a lot of work or a lot of evidence to be collected to see that that is effectively happening. And just to give a point, if we compare on-time filing of VAT using as a source the 90 TARAT assessments around the world, we can see that from 1 to 4, minimum 1, maximum 4 of range, most countries stay at number 1. So on-time filing of VAT is still not showing very robust results. And again, considering VAT is one of the most important sources of revenue, that is an issue, right? So to us, e-invoice is clearly probably most important parts of the revolution on tax administrations up to date. But in our view, and at least in my view, there is still some space to transfer those huge amount of information into a better use to improve compliance. And in terms of the other uses of electronic invoicing, and coming back again to the presentation, I think there are good areas that we can think about, that how can e-invoice be used. Of course, from the government side, the most important use, in my view, is to use it to improve tax compliance, right? But there are also other uses, because it's such a valuable information that use it only for that purposes may perhaps reflect some opportunity costs to improve the fiscal policies in the country. So we can think about some uses. The electronic payroll, which is something that is used in Argentina. I think it's a very good example. Factoring in Chile, tracking goods with tax documents in Brazil, which of course Brazil is an excellent example of how best to use this facility. And I think there are very good results to reflect that could be used in other countries. Of course, this is on the context of the VAT implementation in Brazil, which, as we know, it's kind of has a very particular features. Public digital accounting system, we talk about the accounting part also in Brazil. And in case of Mexico, outsourcing and technological standard of electronic voices. There are other examples as well. And let me refer to a very case that I think is very useful to reflect on, which is the case of China. As we know, China is a relatively late implementer of VAT. They, of course, have a business tax for many years or many decades, but it was not until 2016 that a VAT, as we know in the rest of the world, was actually implemented. And it turns out that the online invoice management system is used not only to improve tax compliance, which of course there's a lot of good results in that area, but also in China, the online invoice management system is helping for the macro policies by informing policymakers with real-time information about the economic activity. Raul referred also before about this similar example in Brazil on the supermarkets. But I think that's a very important part, and especially now in the as we transit to this the COVID crisis, for governments to better improve their economic forecast, they need to have better information to understand what is the deepness of the impact of this crisis into economic policies. And I will say that if the use of electronic voices beyond tax administration and to use it as a real-time economic track of the situation has a lot of uses like it's done in China. They will have much better information for that purpose. Of course, there are other uses that we can think of. Such amount of information can also be used to improve tax policy design, to understand what is the distributional impact of taxes, the distributional impact of alternative policy choices, and also to better understand what could be the impact in terms of tax expenditures that are provided by the tax system. So there are a lot of uses that can be done. But getting back again to the tax administration, which is what is our most common objective in this chat, we believe, and this is experience that we have, and I talk a lot with Alberto and other colleagues from CIET as well, and other development partners. There's still a lot of work to be done in terms of improved management, using data analytics, big data, in order to transform all this critical mass of information coming from the electronic invoice into higher compliance and smart tax policies. So thank you very much. Let me stop here. I'm happy to respond any question coming from these remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, Alberto, and thank you for your valuable insights from your point of view. Your work in a international development bank makes it especially interesting for us. And yes, we are coming to the answers and questions. And I'm not going to give a summary here before it. I just want to to share with you some data on electronic invoicing that we can get from ISORA, the International Survey on Revenue Administrations. That, as you know, get the data from more than 150 countries, what represents more than 90% of the people in the world and the GDP. And concerning electronic invoices, the results highlight that this technological innovation is not led by high-income countries, which register a lower degree of implementation. Around 23% of them are using these systems. And they are surpassed by lower income countries. 29% of medium high income countries has adopted electronic invoice systems, 27% of medium low income countries, and even 26% of the low income countries. And among all these countries, the SIAT members would lead the degree of implementation by far. 40.5% are implementing or have implemented electronic invoice systems. So after hearing all our experts, speakers today, I think that there is no doubt that electronic invoicing is going to be in the future. It's going to be the future of tax administration. And at least this time, the future is coming from the South, is coming from Latin America. And well, of course, you can keep on answering the polls. Here it is about the webinar. You can answer it now or during the final part of this seminar. Now we are going into the questions and answers part. For this one, we can start our videos. Yes, please, David, could we start the video? Well, while
I am requesting this to the panelists.
It is blocked. Okay, well, I will begin with the questions and answers. It is not so important now, our faces. And I will begin with Raul and Vinicius. You both have experience, real field experience implementing e-invoicing systems. And that's why I want to ask you a couple of questions. First, to Vinicius. If you have to sum up, which do you think is more recommendable to implement? An e-reporting system or an e-invoicing system? Please, all of you, please be brief in the answers, even if I know that it's difficult. So, Vinicius?
Thank you, Santi. It's a tricky question. I'll be really brief on it. I won't take more than 3 or 3 hours to answer it. But, you know, you have, first of all, to look at the culture of the society, because as we saw in Anna's presentation, for instance, in Portugal, you have in place a law that forbids tax administration to have all the information about invoices. So in that case, you cannot even think about having the kind of strategy we have in most countries, or I'll say all countries in Latin America. But and if you go and listen to what companies are saying, and that was the message of the last slide of my presentation, companies are saying, listen, it's better for we as clients and we as issuers, if a tax administration formally expresses its agreement with this document, because this brings us all much more confidence that we are doing the things right and our operations will not be challenged and, you know, sanctioned for any reason. And going through this path, I would say that it's, if you are thinking about to implement any kind of strategy regarding invoicing, e-reporting, tax, whatever, in my opinion, it's better for the society, and for the society, now take the slides from Raul's presentation. We think about the benefits for the society, the benefits for the companies, and the benefits for the citizens. An electronic invoicing system would be more efficient than an electronic information about invoicing or an e-reporting system. But you always have to this issue answered. Is it possible for this kind of strategy in your country? Either in terms of legal possibilities and cultural possibilities.
Thank you very much, Vinicius. Difficult question, I think, but a very good answer. Thank you. And the next one goes to Raul. Invoicing has many advantages. You have been talking about them, but of course only if the process is successful. Concerning this, what do you think is the biggest risk when beginning to implement an e-invoicing system? Next slide, please.
Thank you, Santi. Not an easy question. It's always easier to talk a little bit about the successful things. So if you put the risk, maybe you can touch things that have not been so successful or that didn't work well in the past. And the key lessons that we learned is that some countries, many countries in Latin America, made significant changes to their models as a way to improve them. And those changes attended risks, they cover issues and so on. So if you have to select a couple of issues, I will bring two of them. The first one is if the tax administration delays the implementation, the schedule that was provided, and continue to keep postponing that implementation, then the society as a whole will not take the project seriously. But the main problem, in my opinion, is that the risk of putting the cart before the horse is to do things backward. And in our situation, that could come from different situations, trying to put an answer before a question, and particularly to design the law before the project, because then the project will be constrained to whatever regulations were put in place in the law, and it will not necessarily fit the culture, the customs, the necessary updates that the situation requires. So my guess is that you have to design, to project, to adapt, and only then put that in a solid set of regulations that the society can really accept.
Thank you very much, Raul. Somewhat common sense, but not always so common. So thank you very much for highlighting it. And the next question, next slide, please, goes to Mrs. Ana Mascareñas, the head of the National Department for Planning and Coordination of Tax Audits, and responsible for the Portuguese e-Factura, the invoice system that we have been learning how it works. And I think that the results are really great, are incredible. And concerning this, Ana, which do you think have been the most effective incentives, tax benefits, lotteries, simplify and tax declaration, etc., to final consumers and businesses to get these results?
Thank you, Santiago. It's a very hard question to answer, because I think my perspective is a mix of everything. If we look into the figures, we realize that the increasing of invoices with the final consumer's tax ID numbers, it's increasing every year. And what we have is more or less step by step. First, you have the fiscal benefit in some sectors. Then you have the lottery, and then you have it's mandatory more or less. If you want to get the deduction on your personal income tax, you have to provide your tax ID number. And finally, well, the automation of the tax declaration is a consequence of it. So if everybody asks, it's easy, and we give back the service. On the other hand, we have, I think it's more a question of the shift of the culture, because even the business understands, because everybody is asking for invoice. So a lot of final consumers are asking for invoice. And on the other hand, they understand that if we cross-check information and we give them the results of those cross-checkings, so the mismatches, and give them the opportunity to voluntarily comply, because most of the things are things that happens not on purpose, I would say. So we help them to comply. So the system is not just for the tax administration to get information. The system is here also to provide help to the final consumers and help for the business to be more compliant, and to help to make a more balanced and fair taxes in society. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you again for being with us and letting us learn so much about your experience. Congratulations for it too.
Thank you.
And finally. Well, finally, but I have to say to all the participants that there are some questions and answers that you can reach at the bottom menu, and that they have been answered by our speakers during the webinar. But going to the last question for Daniel, Alberto, using their perspective of in invoicing from these leading international development organizations, what do you think? What role may an invoicing system play in promoting development, especially in medium and low-income countries? Please, Alberto.
Daniel, do you want to answer it?
Oh, Daniel.
Go ahead, Alberto. Go ahead.
No, just two things before he goes for the answer. One thing, Portugal and Spain has done a kind of surrounding of the electronic invoice, even though particularly the people think that the key factor of the tax electronic invoice is to have the intervention of the tax administration. However, in the EU and in some other countries, there is some sort of constitutional impediment to apply the electronic invoice on a, let's call it, faster way to get into the tax administration, maybe on batch or maybe online, which is the future. I have no problem with that. I think that for less developing countries, Daniel will take care. But one thing that I think that is important is that in the future, I'm going to take an external view, Daniel will take the internal view of the advantages, is that if in the future we will have an electronic international invoice for good and especially services, look what we are doing now. We are in every part of the world and we can be linked. So it's very easy to do. We will solve a lot of tax policy issues and probably a lot of also crime and fraudulent transactions and everything. Why? Because we solve a lot of illusion through transfer pricing. We solve also a much better control of invoicing on what we invoice. And in a world which is going to be fully commercially and trade integrated, that's very, very important because we can build trust. So I think that there is a domestic issue that will take it, Daniel will take it, but I think that there is also an international issue that we have to surpass this, let's say, constitutional right of not invoicing, because if for developing countries we can solve the issue of international electronic invoice, and particularly for service, we will solve a lot of illusion and a lot of tax avoidance. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alberto. I certainly can echo your policy view, and I think that's the way that we should go, both on the low income capacity countries and the developing economies. I think that's the goal, and that will help to solve a lot of the problems we're facing. From that perspective of low development countries, and I think this goes back to the point we made before in terms of the one size doesn't fit all. And I think that's particularly important in the case of low country context. The key part or the key variable here is to consider the administrative capacity of revenue administrations. The invoices sometimes refer to a huge investment at some points, and resources are not necessarily there, not only in terms of investment, but also in the capacity for countries to absorb and to implement such an important reform. There is, in our view, in our experience working in that setting, a couple of things that I think are common and probably are less sexy in terms of the invoice, but there are things that we run on face challenges that low capacity countries face a lot, not only in the context of invoice reform, but also in the context of broader tax administration reform. No? First of all is to have a clear strategy. To have a roadmap of reform. What exactly is the objective of the invoice? And this is probably a very evident response in terms of what we have been discussing. But at some point when we, and Alberto, you remember this very well, we have been partnering together to sort out these issues with some countries in other settings. Having a clear strategy is a critical part. What is exactly the vision? What is the policy proposition behind the invoice? That is something that, as a discussion, that needs to be taken at the first step, considering again the country context. Second, and I think Anna referred very well to this point, consultations with the private sector, with the business community, with the taxpayers, and with the IT providers is critical, and have them on board since the beginning, and make it part of the strategy and the policy proposition. It will help a lot to visualize in future how the solution is actually going to work out, not only for the tax administration, but also from the business side. And I think that is also something that not necessarily is taken into consideration in all settings, but I think in the low capacity economies in particular, it's important to have since the beginning the input from the business sector and the taxpayers. Number three is kind of the project management. At the end of the day, implementing Invoice, and you have done that, Raul and other colleagues, is not something that is very easy. I mean, it's a huge endeavor that requires to put this strategy and to reflect it in changing policies, operational business processes, IT technology, and so on and so forth. It's not something that it's quite easy, actually. So you need a strong sense of project management. And again, in the context that we work on, is not something that it's necessarily given. You have to help them to sort of build this capacity to manage such type of projects. And of course, the part of implementation is as you may agree with me, and probably some of can reflect in some of the commenters or the participants to this chat. That's also something that it's not given. Implementation side even with a clear strategy and with clear reform maps, it's not easy. How to deal, for example, for procurement when it's needed. We know that it's not an easy thing to do. Going for monitor and evaluation as these reforms take place in several years is also something that needs to be taken in consideration. And the part of the impact, sort of to at some point after 3 years or 4 years of implementation, and as the invoice is rolling out, there should be a point in which you get back to say, okay, what is the benefit of this investment, right? And you need to go to the stakeholders, to revenue administrations, fiscal authorities, Congress, and business people to say, okay, these investments that we are all doing and this effort that we are carrying out in terms of business community tax administration is actually yielding some particular fruits in terms of compliance cost and compliance level. So this is, let me stop here. And this is kind of like a brief summary of how I see in the context of low development countries.
Thank you very much, Daniel and Alberto. Thank you again for being with us. We are approaching the end. For me, it has been a luxury to be here with you. I just want to give you also the opportunity to, if you want to say anything else. I'm looking now at the poll results about your expectations, if you would recommend it to a college with topics for the future, etc. And the results are really good. Thank you very much to the around 100 participants. Of course, I want to remember all of you before letting the floor to our experts, if they want to say anything else, that all this information is going to be on our webpage, where you can find this, the publication that is giving place to these web seminars, our collaboration with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and a lot of more information, databases, all the publications, the review, etc. Well, thank you to you all, and Vinicius, Raul, Alberto, Ana, Daniel, thank you very much for your professionality. And if you want to say anything else, please. Well, that's the bad thing about the virtual meetings. We can't hug, we can shake hands, but okay, I hope that we could transfer some of these warm feelings to you all. Thank you very much, and thank you to all participants. We are going out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, to be here and to listen to all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.